Eluthex, The Origin of Dr. Elias Varn, by Jacques XX. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Watched. Long before the mansion, before the experiments, before Subject 16 screamed through the halls of a place never meant to exist, there was only a boy. His name was Elias Varn. Elias grew up in a quiet town that seemed allergic to chaos. Streets were straight, lawns were trimmed. The people smiled in ways that felt rehearsed, like actors repeating lines from a play everyone already knew. Elias noticed things other children didn't. He noticed how smiles vanished the moment people thought no one was watching. He noticed the way his father's voice changed depending on who he was talking to. Friendly with neighbors, cold at home, he noticed that people were inconsistent. To most children, this was normal. To Elias, it was a puzzle. He began watching people the way scientists watch insects. When he was 8 years old, his mother cried in the kitchen late at night. Elias sat on the stairs, listening to the soft sounds of grief echo through the house. The next morning she laughed at breakfast like nothing had happened. Elias stared at her. "How can you be sad and happy so quickly?" he asked. His mother chuckled nervously. "That's just how emotions work, sweetie." But Elias didn't accept that answer. Emotions should follow rules. Everything should follow rules. And if emotions didn't, then perhaps they weren't as mysterious as people believed. Perhaps they were simply chemistry. That idea lodged itself deep inside his mind. By age 10, Elias was reading books far beyond his grade level. Biology textbooks fascinated him most. Inside the brain were tiny chemical messengers. Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, invisible molecules controlling happiness, fear, love, motivation. The more Elias read, the more something unsettling dawned on him. If chemicals controlled feelings, then chemicals controlled behavior, which meant something else followed logically. Morality, right and wrong, might not be philosophical at all. It might simply be chemical regulation inside the brain. Most people would have dismissed the idea. Elias did the opposite. He became obsessed. At 13 he built a small lab in his bedroom. Nothing sophisticated, microscopes, test tubes, old chemistry kits, but it felt like the beginning of something enormous. He started simple, studying animal behavior. Ants, mice, even insects changed behavior when exposed to certain chemical stimuli. More aggression, more activity, less fear. Chemistry changed the way creatures behaved. Elias began keeping a notebook. Inside it, he wrote the first sentence that would one day shape his entire life. Morality may simply be a biochemical limitation imposed by the brain. He stared at those words for a long time. They felt important. Dangerous ideas often do. Outside his window the town remained quiet and peaceful. Inside his room, a boy had just begun walking towards something the world would one day regret. Chapter 2. A Mind Without Limits. Elias Varn entered college at 17. The university campus felt like a cathedral of knowledge. Towers of glass laboratories, endless libraries, lecture halls buzzing with ideas. To Elias, it was paradise. Most students spent their first year discovering parties and freedom. Elias discovered the neuroscience department. He devoured everything: neurochemistry, cognitive science, behavioral psychology. He treated knowledge like oxygen. Professors noticed him quickly, not just because he was brilliant, but because his questions were unsettling. One afternoon during a neuroscience seminar, a professor discussed serotonin's role in emotional regulation. Low serotonin levels, the professor explained, are linked to aggression and impulsive behavior. Students scribbled notes. Elias raised his hand. "So theoretically," he said calmly, "if someone could precisely regulate serotonin and other behavioral chemicals, they could regulate morality." The room grew quiet. The professor frowned. "That's a philosophical stretch, but chemically accurate," Elias replied. A few students laughed nervously. The professor cleared his throat. "Morality involves culture, ethics, empathy, far more than chemistry." Elias leaned back in his chair. "Or perhaps those things are chemistry." The conversation ended there, but Elias continued thinking. Every night in the lab he studied brain wave activity, electrical signals inside the brain measured as patterns, alpha waves, beta waves, gamma waves. Electrical signals and chemical messengers worked together, like two halves of the same machine. And machines could be modified. That realization electrified him. He began experimenting with synthetic compounds that affected neural activity. Small effects at first, temporary stimulation, heightened focus, minor emotional shifts, but nothing revolutionary. Until the night everything changed. It happened late during his third year. Elias was studying the interaction between neurochemical receptors and electrical brain wave amplification. His theory suggested something radical. What if a compound could synchronize brain waves while altering behavioral chemistry at the same time? Not just mood, not just attention, behavior itself. The experiment was almost routine. A new compound mixture reacted in the beaker. Clear liquid, completely still. Elias examined the data from preliminary tests on neural cultures. The results made him freeze. Electrical activity spiked dramatically. Neurons fired in highly synchronized patterns. Even more shocking, the chemical response indicated heightened aggression and suppressed inhibitory signals. The brain's restraint systems weakened. Elias whispered to himself, "This shouldn't be possible." But the data didn't lie. He had created something new. A compound that influenced both brain chemistry and neural wave activity simultaneously. He stared at the glowing sample beneath the laboratory light. His mind raced with possibilities. If morality truly was chemical restraint, then this compound could remove it. Not reduce it, erase it. The idea should have terrified him. Instead, Elias smiled. He wrote a single word on the vial's label. Eluthex. From ancient roots meaning liberation. Because Elias Varn believed he had discovered something profound. Human beings were not moral creatures by nature. They were restrained creatures, bound by the chemistry of their own brains. And Elias Varn had just discovered the key that might unlock the cage. Chapter 3. The first trial. Elias Varn was no longer a student bound by classroom rules. He had crossed into something quieter and more dangerous, private experimentation. After the university's ethics committee rejected his official proposal, Varn continued his research alone in the late hours of the neuroscience lab. The halls emptied by midnight, leaving only humming fluorescent lights and the distant sound of ventilation fans. On the metal table sat the vial labeled Eluthex. The liquid inside was perfectly clear, harmless looking. Varn placed a small laboratory rat into a containment enclosure and prepared the injection. His hands were steady. In his mind this was not cruelty, it was progress. The needle slid into the animal's bloodstream. At first, nothing happened. The rat sniffed the air and paced along the edge of the enclosure. Then the brain monitoring equipment began to spike. Electrical activity surged across the screen in violent peaks. Neurons were firing in synchronized patterns far stronger than baseline behavior. The rat froze. For several seconds it remained completely still. Then it attacked. The animal hurled itself violently against the glass walls of the enclosure, gnashing its teeth and clawing at the surface as if trying to reach something beyond it. Varn leaned closer, fascinated. The aggression levels were extraordinary. Even more remarkable was the absence of hesitation. The rat showed no fear response, even when exposed to loud noise or sudden light. The creature behaved like it had forgotten the concept of danger. Varn scribbled notes rapidly. Inhibitory chemical signals suppressed. Neural wave synchronization extreme. Fear response eliminated. The data confirmed his theory. Morality, restraint, hesitation, these were not philosophical constructs. They were biochemical limitations. Over the next several weeks Varn repeated the experiment dozens of times with mice, rats, and other small animals. The pattern remained the same. Eluthex didn't simply make animals aggressive. It removed the internal brakes that normally stopped behavior before it went too far. The animals became fearless, unpredictable, violent. Yet Varn saw none of this as failure. To him, the experiment proved something monumental. Nature had placed a chemical governor on the brain. And he had found a way to remove it. Chapter 4. The Ethics Board. Scientific discovery thrives on skepticism, but institutions are built on caution. When the university discovered Varn's unauthorized animal trials, they moved quickly. A disciplinary hearing was scheduled within days. Varn sat at the long conference table across from a panel of professors and research supervisors. The atmosphere felt less like a meeting and more like a trial. A senior neurologist spoke first. "Mr. Varn, your experiments violate multiple ethical guidelines. You conducted unauthorized behavioral testing with synthetic neurochemicals." Varn remained calm. "The results justify the research." A folder of printed brain scans slid across the table. "These patterns demonstrate controlled suppression of inhibitory neural signals. The compound works." The professors exchanged uneasy looks. Another member of the board leaned forward. "You're attempting to chemically alter behavioral restraint in living organisms. Do you understand the implications?" "Yes," Varn replied. "That's the point." The room fell silent. The chairwoman spoke carefully. "Morality and behavior are not simple chemical switches." Varn shook his head. "They are exactly that. Chemical limitations shaped by evolution. Eluthex removes those limits. You're proposing to eliminate moral inhibition. I'm proposing to discover what humanity looks like without it." The decision came quickly. All research privileges were revoked. Varn was expelled from the neuroscience program. The board believed they had ended a dangerous project. Instead, they had simply removed the last obstacle standing in Varn's way. Chapter 5. The Mansion Project. Ideas do not die easily, especially in brilliant minds. After leaving the university, Varn disappeared from the academic world entirely. Months passed without any sign of his research. In reality, his work had simply moved somewhere quieter. Far from public scrutiny, an abandoned estate outside the city was being renovated into a private laboratory. The mansion had once belonged to a wealthy industrialist, but decades of neglect had left the structure crumbling and forgotten. To Varn, it was perfect. The isolated location meant privacy. Inside the walls he built a research facility that rivaled any university lab. Observation rooms, containment chambers, security systems, medical equipment, everything necessary to continue the Eluthex project. Funding came from private investors fascinated by the promise of neurological enhancement. They believed Varn was developing a breakthrough in cognitive performance. None of them understood the true objective. A small team of technicians and researchers were hired to assist with the experiments. They were told the compound enhanced brain function, which, in a very narrow sense, was true. But enhancement was not the real goal. Liberation was. Varn believed he was about to prove that human morality was nothing more than a biochemical leash. Chapter 6. The First Human Subjects. The first volunteers arrived quietly. Each signed confidentiality agreements and received generous financial compensation. They believed they were participating in neurological research that might improve focus and mental clarity. The early results were promising. After receiving small doses of Eluthex, subjects reported increased alertness and confidence. Reaction time improved. Cognitive tests showed heightened performance. For a moment, Varn believed the compound might truly revolutionize neuroscience. Then the side effects appeared. One subject attacked a laboratory assistant during a routine scan. Another became violently paranoid, accusing the staff of conspiring against him. A third simply stopped responding emotionally to anything at all. Joy, fear, empathy, gone. The staff began whispering concerns. The compound seemed to erase the emotional filters that guided normal behavior. But Varn remained convinced the problem was dosage, not design. The next version of Eluthex would correct the instability. Or so he believed. Chapter 7. Escalation. The revised Eluthex formula was stronger. Much stronger. Varn's chemical modifications amplified neural synchronization far beyond the earlier trials. Test subjects displayed remarkable cognitive clarity. They spoke faster, solved puzzles instantly. But something else changed. Their personalities began to flatten. Emotion disappeared. Empathy faded. One subject calmly described how easy it would be to harm another person if there were no consequences. Another admitted that fear had completely vanished. They were not angry. They were simply detached. The staff began noticing a disturbing behavior. Subjects often watched the technicians through the observation glass for long periods of time. Not with curiosity, with calculation, like predators studying unfamiliar prey. Varn recorded everything. To him, this was confirmation of his hypothesis. Morality was not a noble human trait. It was a chemical restraint. And Eluthex had removed it. Chapter 8. Subject 16. The previous trials had been unstable. Subject 16 would be different. This version of Eluthex represented the most refined chemical formula Varn had ever produced. When the injection entered the subject's bloodstream, the brain scanners immediately reacted. Wave patterns aligned with perfect symmetry. Electrical activity surged across the monitors. Every neural inhibitor signal dropped. For the first time, Varn saw exactly what he had been searching for. A brain functioning without internal restraint. Subject 16 sat silently in the containment chair. Eyes open. Completely still. Hours passed without movement. The staff became uneasy. But Varn was ecstatic. He believed he had created the first human mind truly free from chemical morality. Subject 16 simply stared at him through the glass. Watching. Waiting. Chapter 9. The Night of Silence. Strange things began happening inside the mansion. Security cameras flickered. Door locks malfunctioned. Electronic systems reset without explanation. The technicians blamed faulty wiring. But the atmosphere inside the facility changed. People whispered in the hallways. Several employees requested reassignment. Subject 16 continued sitting quietly inside the containment chamber. Sometimes for hours. Sometimes for entire days. But the staff began noticing something unsettling. The subject wasn't staring randomly. 16 was studying them, tracking their movements through the glass, learning their routines. Then one night the power failed. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in dim red illumination. The containment door opened. Subject 16 stepped into the hallway. Chapter 10. The Eluthex Catastrophe. At first, the staff believed it was a simple containment failure. Security teams were dispatched to escort the subject back to the chamber. Minutes later the first scream echoed through the facility. Then the cameras went dark. Panic spread rapidly. Technicians locked themselves inside control rooms. Researchers hid in storage areas. Emergency alarms echoed through the halls of the mansion. Subject 16 moved silently through the corridors. Not rushing. Not panicking. Hunting. One by one, the staff disappeared. Dr. Elias Varn remained in the central laboratory, staring at the failing security monitors. The screens showed brief flashes of chaos. Then static. For the first time since discovering Eluthex, doubt crept into his mind. Maybe morality had not been a restraint. Maybe it had been a stabilizing force. Without it, the human mind became something else entirely. The lab doors opened slowly. Subject 16 stepped inside. The scientist who believed he had liberated humanity now stood face to face with the result of his experiment. Fear flooded through Varn. The very chemical reaction he had spent years trying to suppress. His voice trembled. I was wrong. Subject 16 said nothing. The lights flickered. The screams of the remaining staff echoed through the mansion. And in that final moment, Elias Varn realized the terrible truth. He had not removed humanity's limitations. He had removed the thing that made humans human. The lights went out. And the mansion fell silent.